Good afternoon to our very large audience today. We appreciate you coming out in the wind, midday. My name is Elizabeth Westhoff, and I'm a teacher consultant on the academic behavior team through the ISD. I'm here with some of my team members, and I'll have them introduce themselves.
I'm Kim Krug. I'm the other teacher consultant on the academic and behavior team.
I'm Lynn Moss. I'm the speech language pathologist on the academic behavior team.
I'm Karen Brown, gen ed instructional consultant and textbook.
She's our behind the scenes. So today we're going to be going over some universal supports for the home. It's because it's such a broad thing. We'll do the best we can to cover different information, but hopefully we'll give you some resources that you can utilize on your own for that individualized perspective. So introduction. So the main points we're focusing on today are executive functioning, supports and strategies for the home, surrounding behavior, and then we're going to touch on dyslexia because that's always something that's brought up. Just starting today, knowing that all of our learners are diverse, we want to keep that in the front of our mind. When we're speaking, we're not speaking to individualized children today, we're speaking in very broad terms. Demystification. Demystification was brought up to me as one of those $5 words. It's a big word that has a very basic meaning. And I found it to be very helpful when working with students and families. This is a very individualized process, and it's a decision that is made based on all the different variables that students bring to the table. Below is a link through PBS Parents that were multiple doctors giving their different bits of information and just different ways you can approach having those conversations. I know demystification is typically brought up with learning disabilities, but it's something that I've definitely gone through and thought about with my students in all areas of disabilities. I've had students come to me asking if this was their disability, and it was maybe something that wasn't brought up yet at home, or parents weren't sure and weren't feeling comfortable on how to approach having those conversations. So this is a link that will be embedded into the presentation today for you to get some more information on that. And really helping our students, you can see all the different reasons why we would start to have conversations. It really just helps them understand the whys and hows of what's happening to them and why things are the way they are. They can understand the reasoning of why it's harder maybe to make friends, or it demystifies, no, you are a very smart individual. This is just the way your brain works. So we're going to go over to Lynn. She's going to talk about executive functioning.
Thank you. Okay, executive functioning. Some of you may have heard this term before. You may have not, though. So this is going to kind of give us a nice knowledge base of why some of our kiddos have the issues they have with organization, time management, and why it's so important to support them both at home and at school. So really quick activity. Raise your hand if you're familiar with a child or a student who is easily distracted. Yep. Raise your hand if you are familiar with a child who has a difficult time keeping their room organized, their backpack organized. Paper's falling out all the time, but never the right paper. It seems to be never the right paper. Raise your hand if you have experience with a child who often forgets appointments, assignments, deadlines. Okay, so all of these different scenarios are examples of kids who may have issues with executive functioning. So I'm going to define executive functioning by saying they're a group of key mental skills that act as the command center in the brain. And I've also heard executive functioning explained by saying a child who has difficulties with executive functioning skills means there's a weakness in their brain's ability to self-manage or self-monitor. And I kind of really like that. It's this metacognitive way of thinking about executive functioning. So how is the brain monitoring itself? Oftentimes, weaknesses in these areas of executive functioning, which we'll get into the specific areas in a minute, but sometimes these weaknesses are overlooked. These students or children could be called lazy, maybe scatterbrained, some other terms we like to use when we don't really know what's going on. There just kind of seems to be this general disorganization, but really it's the executive functioning that is impacted. ADHD kids oftentimes have issues with executive functioning, but not always. Executive functioning issues are found in kids with ASD oftentimes and other learning disabilities as well. If you suspect that your child might have executive functioning issues, you could go to a doctor. There's no specific test for executive functioning per se. It would be sort of the same process for assessing for a learning disability. It's not something that qualifies you for an IEP, but it would fall under a specific diagnosis of ADHD or ASD, which then would qualify you for, obviously, for support services. Alrighty, go ahead and click. Oh, you're clicking? I'm clicking, sorry, I thought Beth saw the clicker. Okay, areas impacted by executive functioning: planning, time management. Time management is a good one. It doesn't just mean being able to manage the time that you're given, but knowing how long a specific task is going to take and how long each little step of that task is going to take as well. So you can kind of add those times up and know how long it's going to take you to do a much larger task, even though it might be multiple steps. Task initiation, and I want to make sure that I say this is not just task initiation of something that is motivating for a student, although that could be challenging as well. But most often you're going to find it's when there's lack of motivation, usually extrinsic motivation, like class assignments, that is hard to initiate. So sometimes they just need a little push on initiating tasks. Working memory is another area that's impacted by executive functioning disorder. So working with a chunk of information and being able to recall that information for the amount of time that you need to complete a task or solve a problem. Self-control, this includes emotional regulation, being able to identify and control feelings and emotions can be impacted when you have a child who has weaknesses in executive functioning. And of course, attention, this is when they're distracted easily and have short attention spans, especially for topics or situations where they're not interested or not motivated. Perseverance, so this would be problem solving, having the ability to not give up and to keep trying different things to get a solution. The handout you just received has a really nice infographic of all the areas that can be impacted by executive functioning disorder. It also has these checklists for each different age group. So there is preschool, middle school, high school. And so if you suspect there might be an executive functioning issue going on, you can go through, use this really nice checklist to kind of check some of these characteristics for your own child. And then this is a nice way to initiate some conversation or communication with your child's school team and talk about what would it look like if we really tried to target some of these areas in the executive functioning realm to help with some of these specific skills. Not just academics or social skills, those are important too, but underneath all of that is the executive functioning. So feel free to browse through that. Whoops. So Kim is going to come up and talk about some strategies to address all those areas I just talked about, how we can support our kids at home. That's forward.
So again, this is going to be very broad. It's not student specific. It's not teen specific. It's just going to be a few ideas on what you can do and maybe understanding if there are problems with working at home, how to help alleviate some of the problems. My niece, maybe some context, my niece has Tourette's, and when she was 8, 9 years old, she was having a constant cough. It developed into a tic. She got diagnosed when she was about 10 or 11 years old with Tourette's. And once she found out what it was, she tried so hard to keep the tics inside. So she would go to school all day long, 4th, 5th grade, and would be totally fine, and she'd get in her mom's car, and the car would shake from her tics, from her keeping everything inside. And that was just, for me, it was a physical understanding of how much our kids try so hard all day long to keep themselves together and keep their body regulated and keep from blurting and keep the sensory pieces under control. So that was eye-opening for me, that her body was just letting go. So it really is important. I know it's kind of a cliche thing, but to let your kids have that time when they get home from school to have a 15-minute break or a kind of a chill out or whatever they need, because they've been through a lot all day long trying to keep themselves together. As far as homework, routines are incredibly important for all kids. It goes back to the executive functioning. It goes back to planning, having a time and a space, having an expectation. If they need a snack or a movement break when they get home, understanding that emotional, physical needs need to be met first before they can get started into a task that's non-desirable or difficult for them, especially when school can be very hard for a lot of our kids. And making sure those supplies are readily available. You're not fishing around to find crayons to maybe lengthen an activity even longer than it needs to be, making sure that the pencils and calculator, whatever needs to be available, are present. For kids who have tough time with initiation or getting started or completing their homework, perhaps chunking activities into smaller pieces, understanding you do 5 problems and we can take a 5-minute break. Using a timer, I used to use with my kids in sessions, like, let's do a 5-minute timer and see how many you can get done. Or we're just gonna work for this amount of time and then we can move on to something else and we'll go back to this. So understanding your own child and how they may respond to taking a few minutes or challenging themselves or only having to work for this amount of time can help get through some of those harder pieces. Offering brain breaks during that time, sensory input by chewing gum, fidgeting, alternate seating, laying down to read a book, those different things that they can do to maybe make it more interesting or more engaging or giving that body that input that they may need. And then looking for times to practice skills in the time that you have. So if you're watching TV, they could be reading subtitles, they could help you reading recipes, spelling words or drilling math things in the car or during a bus ride, having times built into their schedule so that it's not so tedious at home, that you're using all the time that you have effectively. When addressing challenges at home, it's important to understand why they're feeling a certain way. So there's some kids who have anxiety about school, and anxiety may not be like a medical diagnosis kind, it's just noticeable change in behavior. So if they're more withdrawn, if they're nail biting, if they're worried, if they have their head down, if they're disengaged, making sure you're responding to your child and to help alleviate that anxiety in a supportive way, offering time and space, offering a snack, some water, if they need to set a timer until they're ready, but having that supportive approach to that child's own feelings of, this is something really hard that I don't feel good about, and saying, it is hard, it absolutely is hard. Why don't you take a few minutes, we'll have a snack. I wouldn't recommend turning on the TV or going into a game because that can get into something much bigger, but something that's like a really easy beginning and end kind of thing that you can do to recognize that they're going through something and need a few minutes and may not be ready to jump right into their homework. What's called verbal acting out or refusal behavior is more, no, I don't want to do this, this is stupid, why do I have to do this, I just worked all day, more of a outright kind of, I'm not going to do this. It can be verbal or nonverbal. Somebody may just put their head down or walk away from you or slam their door. That's more, you want to approach with setting clear limits. I think of a speed limit sign with that, with it's clear, enforceable, and reasonable. You don't want to say, if you don't do your homework, you're never going to hang out with your friends ever again. Making sure it's something that's reasonable, has a clear expectation, and that you can actually enforce. Maybe if you don't get your homework done before 8 o'clock, you can't play on your video games or you can't watch a show or whatever it happens to be, but having that clear set limits with your child. Don't get into a power struggle. Sometimes I have a toddler and it helps for me to even take a break and walk away because she's really good at getting in a power struggle. So recognizing that in yourself and saying, I'm gonna give you a minute and we can decide, or you can decide what you'd like to do right now and step away for a second, even counting in your head. Also allowing that time, because sometimes we feel like we're giving them time to respond, and truly it's their processing time, their functioning, their anxiety level is such that they're not able to maybe make a logical decision. So you may make sure you give them a few seconds to think where you're not talking. And using a timer or visual could be helpful, and offering choices that are, again, reasonable. I think that's, yeah.
And I know avoiding that power struggle, it just makes me think of my own children, because they just know how to push your buttons, don't they? One thing that I've utilized in the past with parents is Parenting with Love and Logic. I don't know if you all are familiar, but I'll pass this around. They have so many wonderful online different modalities to get information and just support parents in resisting that power struggle that our children just know how to anchor us into every time, and really giving you the power to not engage with those struggles and to help you get back that control and calm back in the home. So now I'm going to be speaking about dyslexia. So we know from research that dyslexia is, the basis of it is breaking the phonetic code, being able to match the letters they see with the sounds they've learned. And we know having trouble with that then makes the whole process of reading harder. Dyslexia is very common, about 20% of the population. And then 80 to 90% of those with learning disabilities are related back to dyslexia. And that scientific research does show us how the brain is so impacted by dyslexia. Dyslexia cannot be cured. I did have somebody ask me one time if there was a pill for that, which I wish, right? Wow, wouldn't that be amazing for children struggling with this and adults? But research also shows us how individuals with dyslexia can become and do become highly successful adults. So one of the common questions that are brought up are the difference between dyslexia and a basic reading disability. We hear dyslexia as a medical term. It's something that a medical doctor can diagnose. And that is what we refer to in the school realm as a basic reading disability. So I just wanted to do a side-by-side to show the difference between the two. Dyslexia is diagnosed by a medical professional, and the student is evaluated by the medical professional to determine if there's a difference in the student's ability and how they're currently performing with reading. Here at the school, we look at a basic reading disability. All of you are here. I assume you're familiar somewhat with the process that goes on at school and having a diagnosis and then an IEP as a result of that. Because not all students that have a disability are determined to need an IEP. So a student is evaluated and diagnosed by the school team. We find that the student does have a disability and the fact that that disability impacts the student's progress significantly in one or more areas. Are there any questions on that? Because I know that can be confusing. So some at-home support for dyslexia. Home is for practice and reinforcement, not new learning when it comes to reading. Books should be fun and easy. And reading aloud and listening to your learner read aloud is very important. We also look at developing a foundation of reading, knowing that there is no magic pill. It's time and text that will bring you through dyslexia, and exploring that technology. I didn't bring a specific list of technology because it's ever changing, but things that go hand in hand are obviously listening to text through Audible and Nook. I know they're linked together. Bookshare is a wonderful program a lot of schools utilize that are free for both textbooks and reading books, novels. The voices within those aren't the greatest, so sometimes the Audible is a little bit easier, getting CDs or checking stuff out from your library. The one thing I can say I really appreciated from utilizing a Nook and then pairing it with the Audible, the Whisper Read, is the student could touch a word on the page and it would read it to them, it would give them the definition. So but the technology is really endless. It has word prediction. Now Google is just Google Speak. There's Read and Write for Google. There are endless possibilities within technology. Can you click the link for me? So I've gotten the bulk of my information through the Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity, and this is, the top 10 things. The resources within this site are endless for parents, for students that are struggling with reading. There are things we have heard of, obviously pairing strengths, but also little tricks you can think of are turning on subtitles at home, which is something I do because I have a hard time hearing, so they're up anyway, but my children are reading along when they're watching TV. But this has been a wonderful resource for me as a professional and a mother. So another wonderful resource that I just thought was a great learning tool and a great explanation of giving you the foundational information for dyslexia and also walking you through the things that can be done was by Sally Shaywitz. She's my dyslexia guru. And in fact, I had to go buy another copy of this book because I lent it out to so many parents. Somebody got their hands on it, but that's all right because it was good information. It was needed information. But the time spent on reading, this is a wonderful graph that's embedded in the book, and it shows you less than a minute per year is 8,000 words. You go to 4 to 5 minutes a year, that's how many words you're exposed to. And if you do that 20 minutes of reading a day, you're exposed to 1.8 million words. And it also goes into statistics of students that read so much per day. It aligns with their overall scores and project different things. The reason I really appreciated this book is because it wasn't hard to understand. I know a lot of times we get into very technical thinking and analyzing and diagnosing of children, especially within the realm of special education, and this was just such a wonderful resource for me, both as a professional and as a mother, so that I was able to understand fully, what dyslexia means and how to then overcome it. And so it's a very, very valuable resource if anybody wants to look at that as well. And just because in the media we have, dyslexia is a very popular term. We have lots of actors throwing around, oh, I see things this way, or I need things this way, and this is just really gets down to the very basic what is happening in the brain. And again, it comes back to that being able to share with a learner, this is why this is tricky. Demystifying, this is why. Your brain works like this. You have strengths here. We need to use those to help you along with the things that are trickier. So really, really nice resource. And then I just put a hyperlink to it, but you didn't need to share it. And these are our resources. A lot of the things we've talked about today, the Love and Logic, the PBS, Talking to Your Children, and then the Center for Dyslexia in Yale is also listed there. Does anybody have any questions?
I have found on Pinterest, actually, is a wealth of knowledge and ideas of games, board games to use at home when you're working on executive functioning skills. And it even has sites that have each of those areas broken down and what specific board games or activities address those specific smaller areas, like is it time management, is it perseverance, problem solving, what area do we need to work on? So Pinterest is a great place to go as well if you're working on some executive functioning skills, and if you're not sure where to begin or how you can incorporate it at home, it's a great place where I would start.
Dyslexia, is it typically paired with other issues? Some people seem like that and this.
It's a great question. It can be just like any other disability, but sometimes it can be a standalone, and so it all's dependent on that learner. It's very individualized. I've known students that are just, that was one area, and there are other students that are much more complex.
Is there still a place, I think, at least with the state, if you can try different technology and borrow it, free, try it out, get a copy pen, or?
Do you guys have a specific resource?
Yep, so we
Yeah.
borrow technology from the ISD.
Oh,
The ISD has a really nice
Yeah.
lending library.
Yeah,
That's
so we-
quite comprehensive.
I know that different school districts are paired with different resources.
Yep, so we use the
Yeah.
county, and
Yep.
that's pretty
And
similar.
We
Yep.
use the county in Wayne as well.
Yep.
Mhm.
There is a statewide organization, and you can subscribe to them for free apps and things, and